Anthropic and OpenAI both have what I would call a very considerable problem, and it's something that it hurts every business if you're not aware of it, and you'll be able to see it from seeing the things that they're going up against. I think the scale of their problem is a lot bigger because of the size of their business, obviously. These companies are charging anywhere from $20 to $150 per user for a subscription, valued at, I think at last reporting, Anthropic got $380 billion valuation. It took Apple like 44 years to get anywhere near that, and they build real things. And right now, a lot of them are going on record to say that you're going to be able to replace your entire team with these products when their entire product or their biggest customers are the people that they say they're going to replace. But they both have a significant product strategy problem that they can't talk about publicly, and it's called the advantage gap. We built our last business to over a 50% market share in the Australian market, and I was constantly worried about the advantage gap. And basically, we built our business being strong on customer support, on design, on user experience, etc. But absolutely every advantage out there has an expiry date. It doesn't matter if you're one of the only frontier models that can afford to spend $5 billion on training a new model. Every advantage gap has an expiry date. And the advantage gap is basically the distance between what you have right now and the moment some external force comes to destroy it. If you're capable of staying aware of this without like losing your mind to anxiety, it's going to be the difference between creating a proper business that lasts the test of time versus something that works in the moment. Because we're building Clipflow and it's not an exciting, sexy AI does everything for you tool versus the ones that pop up overnight and get 10,000 users. I think there is a considerable difference between building the businesses in those two ways. And one of them has a much faster path to the advantage gap being taken from you. And it's the exciting, sexy tool that gets 1,000 users overnight. And that in itself reduces the chance of you building a sustainable business inside before the gap basically gets eroded. Because obviously the things that look the most appealing from the outside and have the shortest time horizon to recreate, they're going to be the things that don't have a long, wide, big advantage gap. You might call this a competitive moat, but it's not necessarily what you've built as opposed to what the market, the macro factor around you is doing. And basically this is something that you see in Anthropic and OpenAI have right now, bigger than almost anyone on the planet because they're seeking so much investment from the outside and they don't really have sustainable business models at this point in time. So I'd probably identify at the moment that these frontier models have 4 significant advantages. Advantage 1 is model quality. So they have the best models, GPT-4, Claude 3, all the frontier capability, only we can produce them. Obviously there are ones around the outside, like you've got Google. It's just released Gemini 3.1 and it's substantially better. They have less of an advantage gap problem, which I'll get into later, but they make money in other ways, so they don't have as much of like a financial model problem. So these two companies raise all this money on it basically being impossible or prohibitively expensive to train these frontier models, the best models in the world. However, then you have someone like DeepSeek come along who figures out that you can train a really advanced model on their outputs and it reduces the cost down to what they claim is about $6 million, which I think GPT-4 costs like $50 or $60 million. So if they're training a somewhat similar model for 1/10 the cost, that's like a 10 to 20x reduction in 18 months. And you're looking at that advantage gap that they probably thought was going to be a lot longer, getting shrunk down massively. And this by itself is just an insane efficiency curve that I don't think any of those companies were really counting on. I don't think they expected to have any open source models come anywhere close to what they were capable of doing. And I think the market reacted pretty accordingly when DeepSeek came out. Everyone like freaked out a little bit. If you build your product with some standout feature and you treat spending as a competitive advantage, you say like, we can spend more than anyone. When someone else comes along and drops the cost of whatever it is you're doing by 80%, you've got a big problem. Your gap just got smaller. The second advantage I think they have is safety and trust by being a huge brand name with a huge business behind it, lots of investment money going in. Every article online is talking about all of this money is getting poured into these companies. They immediately have safety and trust built in. And then obviously Anthropic is also claiming to be the safety and trust provider. They're claiming to put that above all else. But the advantage to being the safety provider or the throat to choke, as it were, like someone that they can come after is time and time again, they're not actually being held to the results of the outputs. Like all of these models still say AI is sort of non-deterministic and you can't really trust it. So be careful with what you do. Like, what kind of safety and trust advantage do you have? They have the brand names. However, the open source variations are coming close enough that they're passing enterprise security hurdles and a lot of audits in most cases. So when safe enough for the enterprise becomes free, then safer than the free options stops commanding that like premium that they're going after, which when you're raising heaps of money at a premium to say the businesses are going to trust us, businesses are going to roll this out, and that's where we're going to get our money from, well, then you've got a problem. So if you're a smaller company going up against giants and one of your marketing tactics is to say, like, you can trust us more, you can fall back on us to be responsible for the outputs, you're going to have a problem when one of those bigger competitors decides, hey, we're going to go after that angle. And you've got to be really careful about how successful you are. Basically, all of these things come down to being really careful about how publicly successful you are with things, because the capitalist market will circle whatever you're doing if it gets enough attention, if it does well enough. Like, if you look at, say, for example, when Cluely launched, how quickly there were copycats. Anytime someone does build in public on Twitter and they say, I'm not talking about the products I build anymore, because the second they get UK MRR, everyone swoops in, creates copycats, increases competition, and this is just a natural byproduct of any advantage you have. The more public, the more successful it is, the faster that gap's going to close. Then advantage 3 is a data flywheel. So they have more users, they get more feedback, they get better models, they get more users. This is a compounding loop that I think they're really leaning heavily on. But the distillation by things like DeepSeek broke that entirely, because the smaller model trained on the larger model's outputs as a signal. And so all of the intelligence they gained from having the most users can now just be distilled, and they can't really stop it from happening. So all of those benefits are just getting eaten up by the open source. And I think the same thing will happen with Anthropic being rolled out into Excel. I'll probably do another video on it. I think it's one of the most important things to happen to business. Biggest own goal by Microsoft, and a huge advantage potential for Anthropic, but it can also be destroyed by what I'm talking about here, the distillation. You used to need millions of human raters to train the models to say, like, this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad. Then it went to the companies with the most users could self-feed and train their model on the user outputs, and then distillation took that advantage away. So while it was a real advantage in like 2022, now it's not so much. So that gap's going as well. And then the last advantage, which is kind of like advantage 1, which is kind of like advantage 1 model quality. This is about the compute infrastructure. To train the models, you used to need massive GPU clusters, and being able to afford them was a real advantage. But for OpenAI and Anthropic, they're all running on Microsoft Azure, or at least OpenAI is. I'm not sure about Anthropic. Microsoft is now looking like they're going to make their own models. So they're on rented hardware. Microsoft's their landlord, was their investor, and now is going to be a direct competitor. So OpenAI is essentially building on rented land. They have to use other people's resources. They don't have the benefit, like Google has TPUs, Microsoft has the servers, Amazon has the servers, Facebook has the servers, OpenAI less so. They have to buy and rent all of these things. So their advantage can be taken away really fast in there. Now, the comparison I would make here is building products into, say, for example, you build plugins for Shopify. You build some sort of notification plugin that tells people when certain products are sold and lets workflows happen from that. And good, because you get the benefit of being a part of a marketplace. You get all of that benefit. You don't have to pay as much for exposure. Like OpenAI doesn't have to pay as much to set up data centers because they rent them. You're renting the marketplace, and then Shopify decides they're going to add that feature into your product. Well, you can be destroyed overnight, in the same way that also OpenAI and Anthropic are doing this with plugin marketplaces now, where they just let you create things into their system and then they erode their value overnight. Those are the main advantages that I see them happening, and they're doing a lot to try and sort of get around these things. They're trying to get into the actual product development. They're trying to make deals around data centers where people invest into their business to give them the data, to give them the machines and the GPUs, like the NVIDIA and Oracle circular investing stuff will They will also most likely be aggressively trying to discredit the value of these open source and Chinese models, do whatever they can in that regard. I imagine there will be skewing of benchmarks, skewing of training data to try and make sure that enterprise level, at the high level, people think that these two models are the only ones that are capable of winning these benchmarks, which the benchmarks are flawed, but that's another story. All right, so knowing all of that, how would you tackle or defend against these shrinking advantage gaps? So obviously, I don't own any of these companies, these OpenAIs or Anthropics, but for our own product, I think about this a lot because anything we build, you want it to stand the test of time. Otherwise, what's the point? These are the things that I would focus on the most. With OpenAI and Anthropic up here, just as an example of like the sort of problems that they're facing, they're also a problem for businesses at our level because they're constantly improving and they're making things possible that you don't need SaaS anymore. It's one of the reasons you saw that huge drop in SaaS prices. Like I think I looked at Atlassian the other day, they're down 50% for the year, which is ridiculous. They have some pretty good products and enterprise is way too slow to integrate and change anything. Like I've been in a big business using Jira for like 50 different things, using Accenture as a consultant. It takes a very long time for things to change. I'm not too worried about Atlassian. If I had spare money that wasn't just going to Clipflow, I'd be investing in a lot of SaaS right now because I think there's money to be made, not financial advice. But what I'm doing for Clipflow and thinking about a couple of things to try and like preserve or lengthen, increase the advantage gap, which is I know that things are going to change. They're changing faster than ever. What can we do? Because you can't control the things that are going on outside. What can you do for your business, for your product that can increase the chance that you're defensible against changes, defensible against the market changing, products changing, people's user behavior changing? So first up is switching costs. AWS, I think, is a really good example here. People are comparing what OpenAI is trying to do to AWS, which I just don't think is true at all because there isn't the physical requirement for locations and physical equipment like there used to be. So like I said, the Chinese models are distilling and you can run this stuff on your local machines. They don't have the same advantage AWS had, but I really liked what AWS did to blow up. Basically, they didn't just have the server there. They sold the compute, the storage, the databases, the serverless, the machine learning. They were selling that you would save costs by not trying to run your own data centers in your office. And at the same time as enterprise was becoming not the largest portion of businesses, so like lots more businesses were spooling up and they couldn't share resources in the same way. Like a Fortune 500 might have an entire building in New York City, and of course they're going to have their own data racks and everything, but they were able to position that it wasn't just the compute power, it was dozens of services all talk to each other. And if you got sold into the ecosystem, not only was it hard to get in and kind of difficult to get out because there's like a lot of trust data. And I think this is where the comparison falls apart between OpenAI, because I switched from OpenAI to Anthropic after OpenAI had history and everything, and I still just dumped it and moved on with my life and didn't really care because I didn't have to pull any of that data across, which is very different to, say, for example, a database with customer records. Once you move that somewhere, there's a lot of risks associated with moving it again. And Amazon, say what you will about their profit margins and everything, they're pretty shrewd business people. They made it way more convenient than necessary to just add on services and get so locked into the ecosystem that you just can't leave. So by the time, if you were a bigger business, by the time you were in there, year 3, leaving isn't even a decision. It's like 2 years worth of engineering time, maybe 2 or 3 people just to consider leaving. This was seen when Basecamp decided to leave the cloud, how much time and money they had to spend to do it. And obviously over the long term, it ended up being a good financial decision, but that's a much smaller company, and trying to convince a 600 person company, 10,000 person company to do the same, you're talking about not only much higher costs, but they just wouldn't think it was worth it. And AWS put itself in this position where it was like, it was expensive, but more expensive than worrying about that when you've got all these other priorities? Probably not. And by moving from just S3 to all of these other services that surround it, having those things talk to each other really well, it's just inconvenient to change, and the service is good as well, like uptimes are good and everything, where it just didn't make sense to try and change. As a business, you might look at a competitor that does one thing that one of the products inside AWS does and think that's way better, but I can get 50% of the product over here, which is, to be honest, most of the benefit. I'm not going to move. It's not worth it. So the product principle behind that is making the next service so easy to add for the customer that it would be irrational not to. So every new thing you add in increases friction for the person to leave, and lock-in is a byproduct of the genuine utility. I'm not talking here about designing traps. I'm not talking about trying to build switching into like it's a problem. So like, don't go and make it really hard to offboard for your customer. If they want to leave, that's on them. That's fine. But make it so convenient to stay. Make the utility of being there so convenient that no one ever wants to leave. And just as a consequence of being heaps more useful in more places, you will become so ingrained in their workflow that anytime some competing product comes out, they'll be like, I kind of wish I had that, but also I'm over here. I've got most of that here. I'm not going to move. And then that follows locking people in. Thinking about this from our lens, if we were just a project management tool that stored tasks and you could leave by exporting a CSV on a Friday afternoon and there was no other benefit other than that's where I put my data, I could go and put it in another project management tool tomorrow. That isn't the competitive advantage that you want. You have no advantage gap in that scenario. However, if your project management tool stores 5 years worth of your decisions, all of the client history, all of the retrospectives you've ever done, all of your integrated approvals, media review, etc., it would take 3 tools to replace what that one tool's doing. Well, then you've got a convenience and a utility problem where it's like, I could leave, but it would be more annoying. There's more convenience to those tools being together than it would be if they weren't. So either one of those that you choose will put you in exactly the same category, but with completely different switching costs, which gives you completely different unit economics. Because if you're able to reduce churn to 0, you can spend more on marketing, you can grow the business, you can hire more people, everyone can have a great time, you can build a better product. So if you're managing the product of your business, you don't have to be a product manager. You're probably like an engineer, you're probably a designer, probably a founder. Send someone or something that can be an agent, I don't care, to run like a parallel piece of work on finding ways of constructing a solid moat as soon as possible. Not in place of the other work you're doing. Do it at the lowest capacity your business can afford to do. Start thinking about switching costs that add genuine value, and they make it harder to leave because your product does so much that's convenient for the user. Because on the side, if this is running on the side, if you can find things that make it more difficult to switch, you're actually finding things that are better for your customer. So it works in favor of tandem at the same time. It still works in favor of building a better product for everyone, but at the same time, you're increasing switching costs for people. You're making it a harder decision for them to leave. And then so defense number 2 is proprietary data. I think this one's coming much more prescient as the world goes on because of the ChatGPTs and the OpenAIs of the world. You're seeing whoever holds the data, whoever holds the exact data and uses daily work to reinforce the data and improve. So like if you use the work that's done today to improve the work that's done tomorrow and then evaluate against the work that was done yesterday, you've got an advantage that almost no one else has, because up to the minute information takes a lot more context for machines like OpenAI and Anthropic to use. You have to push more context in. Windows get bloated. So you'll see this when you'll see it when you're using Claude or Codex, whatever it is that you use, that the more you use it, if it improves itself, you'll notice like little things where you're like, I remembered last time that I like doing things in that way. If you can build that into your product, you're increasing switching costs, like I said before, but you're also making your model stronger, not just for that customer, but for other people as well. Because say, for example, in Clipflow's case, I want to write a script for an Instagram reel and I want a good hook. If I go and ask Claude or I ask OpenAI, can you write me some good hooks for Instagram Reels? It's going to have some information that's probably really out of date. But if you were training on every piece of content that went out there and all of the performance analytics that went out there and you got an idea of what good hooks were, you would have up to the minute data that people don't have. Other people don't have this. And you also can't just copy paste the system instructions into an OpenAI and a Claude and get the same result, which is essentially where you want to be. If model switching becomes this really common thing where everyone's always like jumping between models, essentially, if you can copy paste from one to the other and get the same result, you don't have enough defensibility. And this is something that I think Anthropic and OpenAI are building into their products quite intelligently, because by allowing everyone, your CRMs, your Salesforce, whatever it is, to connect via API, they get to train off that data. They get more real data, and it's one of the reasons they can subsidize these costs. Like, it's costing them a lot more to run these APIs and have all of these context shifting everywhere than they would be making from it, but they train better models because of it. And what they're hoping, say for example, like Anthropic integrating with Google Sheets, is that they get more and more better data, and then their model gets to a point where you can't copy and paste and get the same result into OpenAI. Can't, or more importantly, into any of the open models. And you'll also see things like ClickUp and Monday and Notion, etc., trying to do this because they're trying to become that system of record for the company's AI memory and the context. And the same thing for Slack. That's why they turn the AI on, because the more context they have about your business, the more delightful results they can get, and the more unique data they can have that makes it impossible to copy paste and get the same output from the other models without dumping a load of context onto them as well at the same time. And the Excel thing, I think, is super interesting. I might save it for another entire video. Essentially, we built software for 10 years, and you would always build the software the way you thought it should be, and you would always then go and watch people work and see that they took the information out of your software and put it into an Excel spreadsheet. And this happened the whole way up into these huge publicly traded companies. Every business eventually devolves into a spreadsheet. So that's why I thought that the Claude being integrated in was just like such a smart move for them, because that's how all enterprise businesses work, off spreadsheets and PowerPoints, which is like, it's ridiculous that it happens, but I get why it happens. It's convenient. You structure the data however you want. Same sort of idea of why Notions, etc., became so big, because you could build it your way. What generally happens is people are less efficient and more confused, but hopefully Claude being in Excel makes it better. Everyone gets better. Everyone coalesces into like one structure and way of doing things because they have the best practice. I think it was a really strong signal for how important having that proprietary data is. And I also think it was really stupid from Microsoft's point of view for me, because they essentially gave away their entire user base. All of Microsoft's customers now will become reliant on Claude and Anthropic to do everything, in the same way software development was solved by Claude Code. They'll say that Excel is solved by Anthropic, and what comes next after that is the Sheets and Excel competitor made by Anthropic, built into Anthropic, and everything migrates into there because all the intelligence is in there and the latest features are in there, and you move off it and Microsoft just loses all of their Office customers. Can that happen? I don't know. Enterprises like to stick with their tools. Maybe that's how they get their user numbers up so they can invest more money, increase their advantage gap. I'm not so sure, because like Microsoft will run their own models and have Copilot, etc. And you can bet that they'll be training on the outputs or distilling the outputs of Claude to make theirs better. In my idea, the best defense is to be the most trusted to do something. Your brand name is the most trusted, mainly because I think it's the only thing that's going to stand head and shoulders above. At the moment, from what I've seen from OpenAI and Anthropic, is they want nothing to do with the responsibility of the outputs of their products. They want to have the best looking outputs. These models are designed to get the best possible result, get a high score, user satisfaction, but they don't want any responsibility for the outputs that come out the other side. They will distance themselves from it. They put it on the thing. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Make sure you verify everything. They never want to be responsible for that stuff. So one of the big defenses and ways of like not having their model replace you overnight is leaning really heavily into being trusted and working or moving to work into more high stakes workflows where things actually matter. So if you were doing doctor's notes, for example, high stakes, things matter, lives can be lost. Do you think that OpenAI really wants to be responsible for that? No, not in the short term. Do you think that Anthropic wants to be responsible for doing the mathematics on a bridge and you drive a truck over the bridge and it collapses because Anthropic wrote the data? No. They're going to let middlewares exist in that realm for a long time, and moving into that space is fine. You just have to get really good at taking whatever data they give you and running safe evaluations over it, humans in the loop over it as well. Like Anthropic is going after the regulated industries, but I don't see a world where they are trusted more than someone who has human faces that utilize the tools, but cross-check and basically sign off and say, we back this information because we use logical programming, deterministic logical programming, to validate that this is the correct output. I don't see Anthropic jumping into that same space anytime soon. The models are not going to get that good that fast because people very rarely buy software just to get the job done. In the more enterprise space, what people buy software for is a reduction in liability. They want that liability and that risk taken away from them. The people making the buying decisions want to be able to present a decision to a board or a management layer and say, this reduces risk for us and our company the most. And that can involve things like audit trails, explainability, error handling, all of those things. But it's more about, at the end of the day, humans making decisions are risk averse and they want to look good in front of their colleagues. They want to look like they make the right decision. So if you can make that a no-brainer for them, you're going to beat out the OpenAI and the Anthropic models time and time again, because you can say that I will stand on the back of this. Like, our product does this and I'll stand on the back of it. Great. Well, they're going to buy that because they essentially, if something goes wrong, they want to be able to say, yeah, I called him, I chewed him out, and it's never going to happen again. Try doing that with OpenAI. It's not going to happen. Then Defense 4 is the distribution and habit creation. So OpenAI has something like 200 million weekly users, but it's definitely not what it seems to be from the outside, because most likely, if you are watching this, you're in a B2B space or maybe a B2C, but more likely B2B tech space. Their 200 million user distribution means nothing if most of the users are getting relationship advice, random curiosity, asking for help with their homework, generating pictures of their cats in cartoon format. I've genuinely seen an ad for that as like a sales pitch for ChatGPT. If you want evidence that they're trying to inflate their users' numbers, I would use that. Something like a B2B tool, their session depth and the frequency of return, the amount of times people are returning, are just not anywhere near what you would expect from a tool that was fundamentally transforming how work was done. And this is coming from someone who uses these tools heavily, or like heavily, but not that heavily, because I still sometimes get so frustrated with the outputs that I just go and do the thing myself. Like, that's not transformational. So don't look too heavily at their distribution numbers and think everything's impossible because everyone on the planet's using it. There's something like a third of the population uses Instagram. It doesn't mean they don't have room for other tools. And move your tool into as close to a habit-formed product as you possibly could. It's annoying because the things that are part of people's daily work, if they go down, it can be a stressful situation. But if ChatGPT goes down, most users would just go and find something else to do. The small section of business and coding users might actually be genuinely flummoxed by it for a little bit. They might switch to another model. But if Slack went down for us, work would stop. I'd be calling people on the phone trying to figure out what was happening. That's like fundamental. It's part of our habits. We go in there every day. It's how we communicate. That is much more valuable than, say, for example, Discord to us, because Discord has some useful information from time to time, a couple of communities you like to stay abreast of, but it doesn't break our work. And I'm aware that some people might use Discord for their work, but it would be the same point for them. It's not the same if you're building something for people's fun or amusement or to get a break from work. Essentially, it needs to be a tool that they have to use to get work done, and they can't just go and do an alternative if you really want the habit forming to be like a strong defense for the business, like increase your advantage gap. Question then isn't really how many users you have, it's how many of them would notice if you disappeared for an hour. If you go down for an hour, how many people are hitting the phones and complaining? The higher that number is, the better off you are. And you should be building for that. Build the product so useful that people flip the fuck out when it goes down, when something goes wrong. Defense number 5 is locking people into an ecosystem. Don't misunderstand this one. It is probably the most likely to fail and the most powerful if you can get it right. So Apple built the App Store, And it wasn't valuable because Apple was the best product at the time. It was valuable because they made a place where millions of third-party developers could build entire businesses on top of it, make a lot of money from it. And these businesses in hand made the platform and the phone as a byproduct the most valuable thing it could possibly be for the users. And Apple got all of these advantages built into their product by other people by making them rich, essentially. And they did this by welcoming developers at the start, software development kits, etc. But that takes a really long time and years to establish. But now for Apple, in Apple's case at least, it's essentially impossible to displace. You can't really take people out of this. So it's not that iOS is technically that much superior than Android. All the habit forming benefits on an individual tool level become even more extreme when you have an ecosystem or a marketplace built in, because then not only is every one of the tools that's built in your marketplace increasing the habits for your product, your iPhone in this case, you've also got way more shots at being part of their habits. So the apps on people's iPhones, say for example Instagram, say for example YouTube, if they become habit forming things, well then the App Store makes money off their habit forming thing and the thing that they've built. And Apple was able to fill this ecosystem by making people money, and then obviously able to scrape enough off the top to piss off most developers by taking 30%. Keeping in mind that lots of people have tried to do this exact same thing, like BlackBerry, Salesforce, everyone tries to do these marketplaces. Most of these things fail. It's not like a no-brainer thing that just works. Interestingly enough, I think OpenAI and Anthropic's marketplace attempts are going reasonably well. However, before you go and build something into their marketplace, just know that they will find all of the most useful things and try and take your advantage gap. They're going to try and take that from you to increase their product's advantage gap, building all of these things, and they have more money than you. But if you can solve the discovery mechanism, which I think is one of the reasons so many marketplaces fail, is they don't solve discovery. Like Apple, the App Store didn't become as huge as it did exclusively because they made it available for developers. It became as huge as it did because they had a huge user base. No one else could access it in any way. By having the App Store with all of the phone purchases, the two things feed into each other. You get more phone purchases, you get more developers who want to make software for those owners, and then that makes the product more useful, so on and so forth. They all feed into each other. So don't try and do this unless you think you can solve the discovery problem, which is either really good marketing on the marketplace itself, or it's your product is going to get so many users that it will just make sense for developers to build for it. Like Shopify Marketplace makes a lot of sense because they have millions of users, people who make lots of money, and developers want to build for it for that reason. It makes Shopify more useful to have the developer ecosystem. You can't build this one ad hoc. You can't just jump into it half-heartedly and say, like, I'm going to make a marketplace. It has to be like core to the business, and you have to have the users to support. Otherwise, people just aren't going to build on it. Like, you've got to ask yourself, would the developer be advantaged building in my ecosystem? Would they not have access to those people unless they build within my ecosystem? Or are they better off just building it outside? Because if the answer is always that they're always going to be better off just building it independently, well, then you're never going to have a marketplace in your tool. Hopefully that gives you a couple of ideas of ways of increasing your advantage gap. Working within your own, like, you've got to be able to just work within what you can control and not worry too much about what's going on around the outside of you, but aware of what's going on around the outside of you. But in the case of OpenAI and Anthropic, I think there's a lot of overblown hyperbole. Like, they pass heaps of benchmarks, but the benchmarks don't translate to real world performance in the same way. Like, the fundamental shift from no AI to ChatGPT 4 to now, it's better than 4. Is it the step change of 0 to 1 was? Not really. And as long as OpenAI and Anthropic still have job listings for software engineers on all of their websites, I think it's pretty clear that none of these things are solved. They have all of the same problems that you have, that you're going into, which is like building the best thing for the user, deciding what to build, deciding what not to build. They just have more resources to do it and more money to do it. If you are ever feeling concerned, you can probably just look at the amount of money they're spending and the amount of revenue they're bringing in, and your business will be 10 times better than them. Even if you haven't made any money yet, your business is probably in a better financial position than theirs. There are benefits to the way that they're playing things. However, There's a lot of benefits to doing things on a small scale and taking the little advantages you can. As long as you can keep an eye on your advantage gap, watch where it's shrinking, where it's expanding, and try and just play the field and don't worry too much about what's going on around the outside, because there's a lot of FOMO going on. There's a lot of, even just the panic in the stock market, I think, is showing that there's like a disconnect between actual work productivity in enterprise and what these models are promising. But I don't think they're going to have the speed that they need, because one of their big problems is they need to make a certain amount of money in a certain amount of time. And the world that we're in takes time to adapt to things. Like if you've ever asked an enterprise to go and change something they're doing, it takes a long time. And this is probably why we're not quite seeing productivity gains yet, because they haven't like fully embraced the next step change and the tools aren't quite there yet. So what you should be thinking about is, if your business advantage is AI, that's not a moat and it will erode over time. And like using AI better than your competitors, that's going to be gone in 18 months. You're not going to be able to play that card for very long. Any competitor can plug in the same API. Every time their model improves, everyone improves. Rising tide lifts all ships. And if you're leaning too heavily on using this as leverage, don't mistake it for a foundation of your business, because the competitors will do the same thing. They will get to the same place as you. So just don't bank on that for too long. Right now, you should be looking at how to build convenient switching costs in, not negative ones, not dark patterns. The best time to build these switching costs in, or at least start thinking about how to build switching costs in, is right now. It's before you need it. Once one of your customers is already evaluating the alternatives, it's going to get too late to deepen the integration. So start adding genuine value as soon as you can to make leaving more inconvenient. And be careful with the integrations, because they can also be a path to offboarding these days, where because the models have such a general knowledge, you can create an integration into another platform and then that platform can do your thing really easily if you haven't done anything about accumulating proprietary context. Building these increased switching costs in, building this value to the customer earlier will compound, and leaving it too late will result in a crisis where you start bleeding users and you say, well, we need to do this thing. Well, it's a little bit too late now. So start thinking about that as soon as possible. And then stop asking, how do I stay ahead? Reactive questions lead to a reactive product, and you're always going to end up one step behind. I think this was like the glint in shining armor that I saw for OpenAI when they started making Sora. When they responded immediately to Nano Banana, it showed that they didn't have their own direction. They had panic, they had reactive product development, and I think they're stronger in coding at the moment. At the time of this video, it could change quite a bit. The codec stuff, I think they're pretty strong there. If they'd focused there and not been driven by a wild CEO who's just like, we need to make better image models for public perception, reactive product development isn't going to get you where you want to go. Keep asking what specific problems your core users need solved, and then figuring out how you can solve them better and faster, not just today, but better and faster for the next 5 years, whatever that might look like. You don't want to be adding just AI features. You don't want to be asking, what did my competitor ship last month? The more and more you can get embedded into the customer's actual problem and not just what they're requesting on the surface, and really get down into what people are asking for from their pain point of view. What's the thing that's causing them pain and costing them time, costing them money, costing them sleep? And then you can build it before half the market is even asking for it. And then you're the person that the competitors are asking, what did my competitor ship last month? It's really quite hard. Like, AI isn't going to help you replicate that level of depth of understanding the customer and earning that knowledge by being like dedicated and focused into the business for a long time is going to get you a lot further. It's going to get you a lot further than chasing your tail trying to develop what every competitor built. Because just from my own personal experience, I can tell you that people have copied things we've done in the past where we built a product, then they launched a competing product 6 months later. Not only was our product better than when they first copied it, because they copy it at a snapshot in time essentially, but the vision for the product and why we were building the thing was already months and months ahead of where they build from the snapshot in time 5 months ago. And if you try and do that, you'll end up chasing your tail. And with that, you'll be building two problems that you can sell that have an advantage gap before the competitors even know they exist. If the competitors are jumping in, everyone's using AI, what should I build for this type of user? Everyone's going to get the same result. If you're in it, if you're a domain expert, you've got a much better chance of building exactly what they need before they even realize they need it, and before anyone else can build the same and shrink the advantage gap again. There is this huge tumultuous time of AI coming in, and the ones who use this window to build things that AI by itself can't replace are the ones that are going to get through to the other side of it. So start building your product to make switching harder, start building proprietary context and self-feeding loops and evaluation in. Be the trusted operator as a brand, as a product leader, as the entire company. Be trusted, be essential in the trust process, like be responsible if necessary. If you're in like a highly regulated industry, be the responsible one. Start building in ecosystem gravity where like you as a product attract the developers and the ecosystem around you and everyone. Your product as a byproduct of being so useful and habit forming attracts all the other tools to it so that you can start being the central feeding point, and then focus relentlessly on understanding the customer and their pain points to the point that you understand it better than they can articulate it. You're going to get miles ahead. I don't think it's changing strategies that much. I think everyone is going to get advantaged by the same tools, and all of these things are fundamentally things that haven't changed since the beginning of time, and you could replace AI with any other tool that's made it more convenient to do work, the steam engine, the computer, whatever it is. If you want to hear more of this sort of stuff, more advice on how to make your business stand out in the market against all of the competitors, because there's going to be more competitors than you could ever have imagined popping up overnight. Staying in the game longer than them is another one. I didn't mention that in this whole video, but just staying in the game, focused on the same thing, is probably like one huge advantage gap. The longer the amount of time that you're spending in one area focused on one thing, that is something that no one can take away from you. No one can suddenly have been doing something for a longer amount of time in one area. So I probably should have put that somewhere in the video, but there you go. There's a little bonus sticking around to the end. Drop what you're building in the comments. I'd love to hear about it and what sort of challenges you're struggling with right now. Peace.